Hey everyone, it's Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers, which I continue to have a blast doing. I've taken a little bit of a break from recording a lot of episodes because I had recorded so many that it's taken me a while to get them out. So I feel bad that some people I talked to 2 months ago were just getting their episodes out now. But this week I had one scheduled. It was actually it was a makeup session. She was under the weather for our first one, so we rescheduled it. But I was very fortunate to talk to my good friend Barbara Nickless. Barbara is the #1 Amazon charts and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of multiple books. She primarily writes series procedurals and has been incredibly successful doing it. Her latest book, which is coming out in November, is Dark of Night, Dr. Evan Wilding, book #2. But Barbara's here in Colorado. That's how I got to know her. We've been at events together. And, it's not a massive crime fiction community in the Denver metro area. So we've gotten to know each other. She's actually down in Colorado Springs, but she is just a lovely person, man. Like, she just radiates kindness and wisdom, and she's such a smart and respected writer. And she's really put out some phenomenal books. So it's been great to watch her success. She's really somebody I care about, and I was really glad that we got a chance to sit down and talk a little bit about the craft, and I got to learn a few things about her, like her house burned down. I had no idea. That was kind of a crazy tale. But and also just I've learned things, like she actually went from being a pantser, writing from the seat of her pants, to having to outline, to make deadlines. And I was really interested in how one makes that transition, because that sounds like it would be something I don't think I could do. I don't know if I'd be capable of it. So anyway, she had a lot of great advice, a lot of interesting stories about her past, how she got to become a writer. So I think you're going to like this one. I know I did. Enjoy. This is my conversation with Barbara Nickless. How was the rest of VoucherCon for you?
It was great. Got to see so many people, and the panel I was on, writing police procedurals in today's climate. So kind of a little nervous going in, because you never know how those things are going to go. And
how
it was
did it
terrific.
go?
It was great.
Yeah, because that can be that's a pretty sensitive topic, right? and it depends on who you're writing, whose perspective you're writing from, what you're writing about. Gets into the whole line of sensitivity readers and all that kind of stuff. Did you cover kind of some of that?
We did, and I think we're looking at there's been such a tradition of what a police procedural looks like, and the heroic cop with the dark past, and everybody's trying to figure out whether it's the novel or whether it's TV shows. Where do we go from here? What does this look like? How do we make sure that we're not sending a message that police brutality is okay in some fashion? If you think about that show, that The Shield,
right,
which you were constantly torn between this Robin Hood type character who was taking from the bad guys and giving to the good, but also doing terrible things himself.
Right. And that was, so The Shield was what? That was probably 15 years ago, 20.
Was it that long?
I don't know. I don't know. But I'm just wondering, like, would that show be made now? And I don't know. And you think about, like, when I think of police procedurals, I think of, in terms of TV, I think of Law and Order, how long standing that show and all of its offshoots, kind of survived. And it was very formulaic. And so you can't help but get into a space of like, oh, here are the steps of a procedural.
Exactly. This is how it's supposed to go. And if I go in and report my crime, this is the kind of treatment I'm going to get from these wonderful cops. But I guess the showrunner for SVU, he's really trying to diversify the cast. And he makes an interesting point that when you're running a show, you go to people you've worked with before, you go to the people you know. And in the past, this has been the white guys that have been in this business forever.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're bringing in people who have talent and promise, but don't have experience. And it's creating some interesting environments, I guess, in the writing room.
Yeah, I believe that, but it's evolution, right? I mean,
It is absolutely.
And the main benefit of that, besides the fact that you've rightfully so diversified, your working environment, is you're going to have some amazing and interesting voices that is going to make your show probably totally different than what you expected in a better way. I would think.
I hope so. That seems to be his determination, and I find that really heartening.
Yeah,
that we're starting to mainstream things that were not considered mainstream at all a few years ago.
Right.
In terms of diversity.
Right. And I think you also want to be careful not to go too far the other direction of saying that every cop is bad.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's the other problem. I mean, in 2020, I really struggled because one of my best friends is a detective, and I'm like, oh, this is this guy is the good guy, but and so I hate to feel how I was feeling, but on the other hand, you're like, Jesus, look at the evidence of it. I'm not saying every cop's a bad cop, but I'm saying there's a lot more than I think people really understood.
Yeah, and I think what we're coming to face now is what we ask our police to do. Mm-hmm. Which is not necessarily traditional police work. They're sent into situations where a social worker might be better. So police are kind of taught one hammer. They're given one hammer. They're taught how to use that one hammer, and then they're asked to deal with all these different size nails. And it's not fun for them either.
Right. Right. Yeah. And what I've always been amazed by, so the only time I've even come close to writing anything of a procedural is I had a secondary character in 2 books ago who was a detective. And so maybe he consumed, 15% of the book, his point of view. But so I relied on my buddy to, hey, can you read this and make sure it's not too out of line?
I do the same.
what I was amazed by him just in conversation with him is how much, when you talk about one hammer, it's true, but then also how many classes they are required to go through, ranging the gamut of sensitivity, those kind of topics. And so they are asked to do a lot.
Yes.
And that's not excusing anything, but I was always amazed by like how he just tells me how many hours they spend in classes, which I think is great. But it's something I hadn't realized before.
Yeah. And I guess with any pool of people, you're going to get all ranges, right? You're going to have the bell curve. You're going to have people on either end outside that bell curve, and one end is going to be the guys that really shouldn't be carrying a gun and a badge.
Right.
But you've also got exemplary cops on the other end. And I think if we start pushing towards more community relations and communication between the police and the community that they police, we'll start seeing things turn around.
Yeah. And it's so, I mean, and I want to get into your background a little bit, but just, have you primarily focus on, procedurals, or you have in the past? What was your gravitation to doing that?
Do you want the long story or the short one?
I want is whatever story you want to tell me. There's no time limit.
All right. The first novel I wrote was this quasi-literary novel set on this tiny island in the South Pacific. Yes, it actually had a cop in there, although he was a disgraced army major, because Chile at that time was undergoing a coup, and the military were in power. So he had detective business thrust upon him. So it really wasn't a police procedural. And the book came very close to selling in New York, but editors, the response we got was, Americans aren't interested in this tiny island in the South Pacific. Great book, but we can't sell it. And to shorten the story somewhat, I said, well, damn it, I'm going to write something they can't say no to. And I knew mysteries were popular. I grew up with mysteries. My mom was an English teacher, but she loved mysteries. And I love the science of police procedurals. Mm-hmm. So
you just love.
I'm going to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So And it's interesting to me too that you chose like to me, writing a procedural or even a cop story in another country sounds like a nightmare. Like it sounds like so much work. Like why? What was your reasoning in looking at Chile?
That's a really good question, Carter. And I think I just had a fascination with, I was looking at Rapa Nui, which we know of as Easter Island,
Right.
and not because I thought ancient civilizations visited there in the past, but the concept of being on an island, it's the most remote populated island in the world, or at least it was at the time I was working on that book. And you can't,
Right.
There's no escape. At the time, there was a ship that came every month or so with supplies. There was a plane that came in once a week. That was it.
Right. So you're kind of attracted to the situation of like, wow, this is remote isolation. What would this do to somebody?
Yeah, and I guess I was writing a closed room mystery without knowing that's what I was doing.
So that first book, how long ago was that? Did you write that?
Oh, 15 years ago, maybe more.
Okay. So I know obviously you're in Colorado, you're in Colorado Springs, and we've gotten to know each other through our Colorado connections. And I'm sad to say, I don't know if you saw that the book bar is closing. That's
I just saw that.
Yeah, that's
unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah, that's a real bummer. That's a wonderful place, and hopefully somebody will be able to do something with it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm hoping somebody steps in.
But did you grow up in Colorado?
I was made in Japan.
Okay.
Which, whenever my dad would tell me that story, I'd say, Dad, TMI, seriously.
Right. After the 20th time, you're like, really, it's okay.
Well, yes. And there were the show they went to beforehand. There were details in that I just really didn't need to hear.
Oh, he told you about the entire night. Wow.
Well, not the entire night, but they went to a show, apparently. And I learned some things about my dad that I could have gone my whole life without learning. But anyway, Maine, Japan, born in Guam, Air Force brat.
Mm-hmm.
And then we settled in Colorado when I was 5. So I'm as close to a native as a lot of people.
That's and you've always been kind of down in the Springs.
That's right. Yeah.
It's funny. I've talked to a decent amount of writers on this podcast who were military brats, and there definitely seems to be that thread of certain writers who are like, man, we were always moving, and books were my friend, like that, because it was so hard to make new friends, and we were never there long enough. What was your experience?
I was really fortunate because my brother's 7 years older than I am, so he's the one that experienced that constant moving.
Oh, okay.
And they were getting ready to ship my dad off to Vietnam, and my mom was like, I can't do this, and I don't want to drag Barbara along the way we dragged Kirby, my brother. I don't know what else went into their conversation, but he retired at that point.
Oh, okay.
So so that really wasn't it. I went straight through from kindergarten through 12th grade. I went to school in the same district, knew the same people for good or for ill.
Yeah.
In kindergarten, there were 3 Barbaras. So they went just arbitrarily, you're Barbara, you're Barb. And then they pointed to me and they said, you're Barbie. Oh. And I had to carry that through high school.
Oh boy.
The same people. Yeah.
Just this random, that's how they tagged you.
Yeah.
So that's interesting about your dad, that so he was able to retire before shipping out to Vietnam.
He did.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm sure that altered the course of family history, that he didn't have to go over there. So
yeah.
That's fantastic.
It was a tough time. He would have been a helicopter pilot, and statistics were not good.
Yeah, that is not the coveted job, I wouldn't think, over there. No. So where did you have the one sibling?
Yeah.
And where were you showing flashes of creativity at an early age, or where did your interest in writing come from?
Not sure my creative flashes were properly directed. But I was fascinated with alphabets and the actual writing, even though I couldn't read it. I knew there was magic in that. And so I was 5, I was hospitalized for my first eye surgery. And I would get well cards, and I would turn them over to the backside where it was blank, and I would just make up this alphabet and write and make up stories to go along with it.
Like
And
make up your own alphabet?
yeah, I
Like
was
your own symbols?
imitating, well, I was imitating my mother's cursive writing,
Okay.
but it was because that writing had no meaning for me. I just altered it in whatever way suited me, and then made up the words to go with my strange writing.
So you were teaching yourself to write in a language that you created. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Sometimes I feel like I'm still doing that. It's like, do you get my books?
Right, right. What is this in a different language? It's very clear to
What?
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's every writer's curse of just like it was so clear in my mind.
It was right here.
And that's a constant struggle, right? Because you lose all perspective of knowing if you are conveying the not only the plot but the emotion and how you're seeing the character develop. You have no idea. Like it's so you for me it's like I need somebody else to look at it in whole
Absolutely.
and be
Yeah.
like, oh, I totally saw this differently than what you're telling me. So
Right.
that's
That's why we have beta readers and editors, right?
yeah, who you have to learn to really trust, and and you have to like really shed all ego. I mean, I think that's kind of one of the biggest things that a writer has to do constantly is shed their ego, because it's you'll you'll get destroyed otherwise if you really start pushing back on it and don't take advice. And but I don't know if you find that as well.
Oh, I find that really, it's very true, and it's very interesting. And I think it started back in the pre-indie days when there were gatekeepers, and we were kind of competing with each other
Mhm.
for this coveted number of slots. Um, I think it was very easy to get caught up in that ego game or that status game. And it's the worst possible thing. It's the worst possible thing anybody can do, but it's kind of unique for writers because especially now with sites like Amazon, it's all up there what people think about your book or how many
Right.
people are buying your book or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean part of the industry is ignoring it, right? Like you have to learn the industry and you have to understand the industry because you have to navigate through it and make the best possible decisions for yourself with whatever information that this opaque industry throws at you. But part of it's also just like, I'm focused on my story. I will promote my story. I will work with the editors, but I am not going to troll through the comments and wonder why this person in Kansas didn't understand the ending of my book, because it'll, but I do think comments are helpful. I mean, I don't really look at them very often. I do when a book first starts coming out,
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
I want to know, because it is a commodity, and you are
Mm-hmm.
selling this commodity,
Mm-hmm.
and if everybody hated the ending, obviously you're not going to change it, but that informs you of like, oh, I misread that. I thought it made sense, but I have to be more respectful of the fact that, maybe I didn't do a great job of it. So I think
9 out of 10 readers in Akron, Ohio were very confused.
so
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk, isn't it?
it
Trying to
is.
learn from those reviews, but protect ourselves from them.
Yeah. And I think everything goes through waves, right? Because it depends on where you are in your career. When your first books start coming out, I think you're much more, I don't know. For me, I was much more focused on that because I'm just like, this
Yes.
is weird. This is amazing. And I
Yeah.
don't understand what's happening.
Yes.
And then after a while, you kind of stop giving a shit a little bit, and I
Mm-hmm.
start caring more. But the voices I hear in my head when I write are my agent's voice, my editor's voice, of like, I know what you're doing and it's not going to work. But I don't think about the audience so much. I write mostly for me, and then I hear those voices, and then kind of you hope for the best.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're able to do that, Carter, because I still sometimes let the reader into the room. As an example, with my first book, which is a police procedural that features a former Marine. And so I was talking to cops and I was talking to Marines, and let me tell you, they have the most colorful language I had ever heard. And I used that language in my book. It was part of how I got into my characters.
Yeah.
And that I would get 1-star reviews because there was an F-bomb on the second page. And and that was that. They
Oh,
weren't
you
going to be
waited till the
past
second
that.
page?
Well, possible it was the first paragraph, but we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah,
But
but
you know,
people,
and then I found myself pulling back in the second book.
yeah, but so much of it is about marketing too, right? If on the back cover of that book the word gritty had been used, I bet the expectation level would have been like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of F-bombs in this book. This is going to be dark, you know, and that is a little bit, not totally out of our control, but it's, you know, that's the publisher doing what they feel is best. And I've had numerous comments of like, well, this book was not what I was expecting. And I'm like, is that good? Is that bad? You
Yeah,
know,
well,
so
yeah,
everything kind of, and a lot of it starts to look the same after a while, all the book covers and things like that, and it is
oh,
hard
they
for a
do.
reader to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So did you study English or literature or creative writing when you went to college?
I did. As an undergraduate, I studied English literature, and I specialized in medieval and Old English literature, in
Oh,
as much as you can as an undergraduate. And then I went back for another undergraduate degree in physics. And
because
about
that's what
half,
people do.
you know, it's the thing.
You usually
So,
follow up literature with physics is what I hear.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
little
Some people
cliche,
go
but
on that MA program, but I wanted to just be as traditional as
Jesus,
possible.
physics.
But, you know, I only got halfway through that program because I started getting migraines,
Huh.
which, you know, I don't know if that was me or the physics, but
But what,
it's like
it was an actual condition that was onset and just happened to coincide, or you think it was just the stress and the learning of the physics?
I actually honestly think it just coincided.
Yeah.
But who knows? You
Do
know,
you still
staying up
suffer from
until
those?
midnight or one. No, they went away after a few years.
Well, that's
But
good.
my son had migraines, and so
So
I
there's
think there
something
is an
there.
inherited,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, it's terrible.
tendency. Um, but then I went back for graduate work in educational technology. That was something my employer was paying for. So
So
checkered past.
you were kind of all over the place. You were like a Renaissance woman. You wanted, there was
Yeah,
a
let's go
million,
with that.
there were a million different things you wanted to do.
I was
So
thinking jack of all trades, master of none, but
yeah, I know that feeling. So then how long was it, you know, since graduating college and then deciding to write a book, or were you kind of writing in the shadows the whole time?
I wrote a fantasy novel in college. That was my independent study project,
Mm-hmm.
which I then sent off to Del Rey. They were the big fantasy publishers in the
Yeah,
US
sure.
back in the day. Um, and that was an agonizing wait. That was my dream. That would have been my dream come true, but ultimately they didn't take the book.
Was that a proper sized fantasy novel, which are 120, 130,000
Yeah,
words?
yeah, it probably was
Wow.
epic. Yeah,
Wow. So,
it was fun.
but that's heartbreaking, right? I mean, I certainly know what it's like not to sell books.
Oh, don't we all?
Well, some people don't, and it's really pisses me off. Some people are
Yeah,
like,
like
yeah, my,
Stephanie Myers. I
yeah,
had a dream, and then I
yeah.
wrote this vampire book, and
But it is a lot of, not a lot, you know, obviously that's the, but people I've talked to, hey, you know, like, yeah, and I wrote this book and you know, it was great. And I'm like, wow, my first three books didn't sell. Good for you, but I won't hold it against you.
not really, really happy for you. Yeah.
So you sent that book off while you were still in college.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they didn't take it, and then what was the next step in writing? Just kind of not facing it for a while.
Yeah, nothing for a long time. I went into I got a job as a technical writer at Digital Equipment Corporation. And then I volunteered on the side. I was the director of education for the Black Forest Observatory, which was the country's largest public observatory.
Hmm.
And that was beyond fun. That was so fun.
Huh.
I taught K through 12 classes. I taught teaching teacher recertification classes, did booths at the mall. It was just fun. So I really got sidetracked for a long time.
Hmm.
And then I wrote that novel on Easter Island.
But what was that? So because this is the thread that I see with a lot of people, and I find it fascinating, is that if you're going to be a writer, it will come out of you no matter what you do to suppress it. And it has a way of just suddenly it's like, no, this is what you're going to do now. But so you remember a moment, because years have passed at this point, where you said, I'm going to write a book about this.
Yeah, I think my husband and I agreed that I would stay home with the kids when they were young. And I was crawling the walls. They were crawling the floors. I was crawling the walls. It was just, I had been a professional woman with, professional friends, and suddenly I didn't have anything. I mean, I love my kids, but the conversation level was kind of low.
It's maddening. I mean, it totally is. Like, even to spend an hour on the right, you're responsible, and you're bored out of your mind.
Exactly. It's like you're responsible for this little life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so, and especially my first child had 24/7 colic. It was horrific. So at that point I thought, if I'm going to save my sanity, I got to start writing. But that's really hard when you have little kids at home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up going into teaching piano because that was somehow easier.
The kids are a little bit older.
Kids were a little bit older, and I could devote myself to that.
Huh.
And then our house burned down, and I said, in the Waldo Canyon fire, and I said,
oh my God.
I am going to do this, or I'm going to go volunteer for Amnesty International in Darfur. I'm going to I have to give this a chance. And that was when I wrote the first book that published.
Huh. So your house burned down. Let's not gloss over that. That's
well,
that's terrible.
10 years ago.
Yeah. I didn't know that. Yeah. I mean, obviously everyone got out okay, but that's
except for two people. Well, our family, yes.
Your family. Yeah. But yeah, and now just, recently with the fires in Louisville and Superior, just when you see how just horrendous and upending to, the worlds of tons of people, it's horrifying.
It's pretty shocking. And I have to admit, before I went through it, I was a little bit, I'd hear about these fires in California, and I was probably a little bit callous.
Yeah.
Like, it's a house, it's stuff.
Yeah.
And then it happens to you, and you realize it's not a house, it's a home. Yeah. And the stuff you lost were all your memories. My dad's World War II bomber flight jacket, and my mom's jade earrings from Japan, and things that had meaning.
Sure.
But we all got out, including the cat.
But it sounds like you didn't have time to grab things.
Well, we were evacuated early, but my father-in-law had just retired from being the wildfire director of Pike San Isabella National Forest, where this fire was burning. And he said, your house will not burn down. Fire doesn't burn downhill. It can't get across that big road. So
all it takes is those huge winds.
Yeah, it was a freak event. So we packed for 3 days, like they told us. And then the day before the fire actually came down, we went back in because we needed clean underwear, and we did pick up a few photos, but not much.
Wow.
We lost pretty much everything.
How did that change your perception of things? Like now that you have, has that changed?
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's this paradoxical feeling of, I don't care if I lose stuff because I've lost everything before and I survived, combined with, oh my God, I lost everything.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose anything. A couple of weeks after the fire, somebody had donated a duvet, and I took it in to get cleaned, and I put my sunglasses down, and the woman picked up the duvet and it swept the sunglasses to the floor, and they broke. And I just was like, but those survived the fire.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's really, totally.
No.
Wow. Yeah.
And then like a week after that, my mom's purse, which is the purse I had with me when I left the house, got stolen out of my vehicle. And it's like, no.
The universe is just trying to finish the job. Oh, man.
Exactly.
That's terrible. But you wrote that first book that got published, and that was a procedural. And what was your you're kind of like me, where you're learning like, what do I do with this book?
Yeah. I had no idea.
Yeah. And you Google it and you're like, well, look for an agent. I'm like, what is that? How do I get one? And, where do I buy one?
Yeah.
And you start to learn about the query letter and you're like, oh, they might not want this. Oh, okay. So you had to go through all that.
Well, my process was a little different because I had gotten an agent.
Oh, okay.
I went to Pitch Fest at Thriller Fest.
While you were writing the book?
Yeah, I was probably 2/3 of the way done with the book, and I went in and pitched it, which you haven't undergone that process, I take it.
No, my agent will participate, so she tells me stories.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of like those 3-minute speed dating events where you've got 3 minutes to convince somebody to go out on a date with you.
Right. And there's a lot of people looking for dates.
Oh, yes. So, but it worked for me. I got an agent.
Which is rare.
And I didn't get the agent out of Pitch Fest. I finished at Pitch Fest. I was exhausted. It was 3.5 hours of selling myself and my book. And then I went up to the elevator. I was going to do a face plant before the cocktail party that night. And Hank Philippi Ryan was standing there.
Mm-hmm.
She's just lovely. And we started talking, and then this man strolled up and she goes, oh, agent, author, agent, and introduced. He turned to me, he said, well, what is your book about? And I looked at him and I said, I just can't. I was so tired.
Yeah.
But it worked out.
Wow. So that person became your agent.
He did. And I've recently switched agents, and I mean, Bob was wonderful and we had a good relationship, but I have switched agents. So that's a new process. So I did go through that thinking, okay, I've got 4 published books, a 5th one coming out, and a contract for 2 more. I thought getting an agent would be a snap.
Yeah.
But not necessarily.
Huh.
It's a new phone and I need it before I leave for my trip. So I didn't want them to send it back.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about, going back to, procedurals and series. So you primarily write series. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it was a conscious decision because I knew series sold, and it was part of that, damn it, I'm going to write something they have to say yes to. And I find it interesting that you've done standalones.
Yeah, probably to my detriment, but
I think you're doing just fine.
Well, series do better, and I think that goes along with kind of what we were talking about earlier with, expectations from readers. And I think expectations are higher, or at least more set with the series. So it is a little bit harder probably to deviate from the norm. For me, just because I don't outline I guess what it comes down to is just like, the joy of writing, and it's not always joyful. A lot of times it sucks and it's terrible. So I've worked long and hard to figure out where I find joy in the writing, and I find joy in the writing and the discovery of new places and not knowing what's going to happen next. And that makes it really hard if you have your mind set on a series. Like for me I already know what characters I'm going to have perhaps, and maybe the same setting. And to me, I'm like, let's just write something about that place. Like, that's exciting to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's so, and it might not work. But it's just the idea of like, what's that about? That's interesting. Because then I look forward all day to the 1 hour that I spend writing, because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's find out. And it's exciting for me.
That is so interesting.
But you came from a very practical, pragmatic, very smart perspective of like, I'm going to write a good series, and then, but that's hard too, because you write that first book and they don't know if it's going to sell well. So it's hard for them to commit to books 2 and 3 that you've already maybe gotten in your mind, or do they commit all at once?
So I guess to back up a little bit, I don't know that I was smart to do a series, because I'm like you. I'm starting to outline now because of the deadline pressure. but I didn't do that early on. I wanted the active discovery. I also get bored. I don't read a lot of series.
Yeah, me neither.
And so my books are not terribly consistent
Mm-hmm.
because I think, oh, that would be cool. Let's go off and explore that. And I'll drag my characters along for the ride. So that's been really interesting, whether I've done well at that or not.
But I mean, the editors are buying the book, so they clearly, I mean, I think there's something to be said for like, hey, this is a series, but this is not what you would expect. You know, you're going to see this person in a whole new light in book 2 doing different things. I think, to me, that's fascinating. I'd rather read a series like that than, you know, the Law and Order. Whereas like,
right,
it's going to be exactly, you know, and I love Law and Order,
right.
but I'm like, you know,
on page 45, we'll have the break into 2.
I mean, it really is talk about, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like very structured. I want to talk a little bit about how you've changed from not outlining to outlining, because that's mind boggling to me. I mean, I tried it once outlining and I hated it and I'm not good at it. So have you found in doing outlines out of a need for making deadlines, do you feel that like have it as expansive as a story as if you had just kind of things that just occurred to you organically as you were writing them?
I think I've settled on a process that works for me, which is the last 2 books, the book that's coming out in November, the book I'm working on now, I did an outline that was pretty detailed. I used Blake Snyder's beats to sort of just, you know, they're like road signs on that drive from New York to Los Angeles in the middle of the night, where you can't see anything past your headlights. You know, that's one way of writing a novel. And these are guideposts, but what it does is it gives me the courage to face the blank screen.
Yeah.
Because all I have to do is get from this small town to this small town. However, I do not stick with that outline because things occur to me that are way better.
Yeah.
That I simply don't have the brain to think of those things in an outline process. It's the writing of the words that triggers that.
Totally. That's exactly how I feel. And then you end up doing things that, you know, are for better or for worse, you don't know, but like are unexpected. And if they're unexpected to you, they're unexpected to the reader. And to me, there's a lot of power in that. And it's also like the best feeling ever when you just had that, like, holy shit, maybe she just dies here. And you do it. And you're like, what does that mean? That changes everything. And an hour ago, I wasn't expecting this to happen.
It's also kind of the God syndrome, right?
Oh, totally.
I can make and destroy you.
So with your outline, you're at least saying, I know certain things need to happen. Mm-hmm. You know, however, how they happen or where they happen maybe is yet to be determined. But for this character to kind of get from here to there in an emotional space, you know, these things probably need to occur.
Well, and I think that's a difference between the psychological suspense that you do versus a procedural, because in a procedural, everything's tied to that body,
right,
and the investigation with the ultimate goal of getting to the killer. And there are simply steps that have to be taken. And I have found that my interests rotate. And so whereas in one book, I might emphasize the autopsy and what they learned from the autopsy. In another book, it's an interview with a family member and how police conduct these kind of interviews. So I'd look at different aspects of procedure in each book, which sort of keeps it fresh for me. So I can do a deep dive into whatever that thing is. But there's a structure there. I don't have quite the freedom that you do, I think.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I am running in. So I'll tell you, I'm running into situations where, like, you know, I wrote this book during the pandemic that I'm like, this is the book I'm going to write, and I haven't sold it, and it just feels good to me. And I think we were talking about this a little bit, and it's kind of different. And the editor's kind of like, I don't know what to do with this, and, you know, and I'm like, I don't know. So, but now, like, the rewrites are pretty tremendous to the point that right now I'm actually rewriting it, and I'm changing the tense. I'm going from third person past to first person present.
Oh,
And that's a lot of fucking work, man. Like like because it's really fascinating actually, and I'm about
absolutely.
80 pages into it, but what it does is it's not just obviously changing those words that indicate whether it's past tense or present tense, or her versus my, but it's like, now that you change that, then the voice needs to change a little bit, because
Uh-huh.
they don't quite think
Uh-huh.
like that. They
Uh-huh.
So there's parts where you can just change it, but there's other parts like, no, this doesn't flow now. I've got to rewrite this more directly from an intimate perspective. But
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
it completely changes how the book comes off, because they were having trouble relating to this 21-year-old woman that I'm writing about, who's the only viewpoint in the entire book. And then you change it and it becomes much more immediate, and they're like, oh, that's who she is. And it's weird.
Well, and it's so interesting because a writer friend of mine, we Zoom call once a week and just talk books and ideas, and sometimes we swap pages. And I, in my newest series, I always have the killer's point of view. I didn't set out to do that. I did it in the first book, and then the editor said, "Well, where is it in the second book?" After I turned it in, and so then I frantically had to add the user's point of view during dev edits. And this friend of mine said, so this time I'm fully enjoying having the killer's point of view, and I'm doing more of it, and I'm writing it in first person, whereas the rest of the book is in third person.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this friend of mine said, what about writing those pieces in second person?
Oh, huh.
And
because that's
and
just how the killer thinks.
exactly,
They think in second person.
or they
that's
could.
creepy. That's
It's
creepy
and interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to have time to play with that because, deadline, but I would really like to.
Yeah. I didn't do second person, but I did exactly what you're talking about in my first published book, where when it would go to the killer was first person present. And I love that, because it's like you're breathing through this person right now. And it just is such a matter of urgency when you're reading that. And then it slows down a little bit when it goes to your protagonist. I think that's highly effective.
It is. I agree. Yeah. And I do like that present tense.
What is that way? I was going to ask, is that what you prefer to do, or what's your, or do you switch
I've not written in that, so I'm going to just try and see how it comes out, and if it has the creepy effect that I want.
It will. I mean, and I think we all find our voice over time. And I realize, like, I'm just better at writing first person present tense. I'm better at inhabiting one person, and just, and it's more fun for me. But it took a while to realize that. And I think it's also kind of wanting to, I switched genders, writing from different gender perspectives out of a need to not sound like myself. And that was really revelatory for me, because I really enjoyed, like, it's freeing in a way, because I get to just shed anything of me, and be somebody different.
Well, and you do such a good job of the female perspective, which certainly not all male authors can do. I mean, it's a thing now, to write from female perspective, and a lot of men are switching over to that, but I would say with mixed success. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was never an intention to, any kind of like, this is what's happening now. But I'm like, I just don't.
No, I know like that's not you.
and then, but it's great, because like my partner's a woman. She's the first person to read my book. Then my agent's a woman. My editor's a woman. So I have no lack of fantastic minds helping me. But I think the whole point is to not overthink it, right? Like, not to focus on, like, well, what would a man do here versus what would a woman do here? I think that's a mistake. I think it's like, what would a human being do in this horrible, horrible situation? And I think there's a lot more commonality than maybe the tropes suggest. And I'm not saying there aren't differences, but I think if you work hard to say, well, she did this and it made it very much like kind of cliche, then it's just then it doesn't work, but
I think the hardest thing in writing, so my first series was first person female. My new series is third person male. And the hardest thing for me is for Evan enjoys beautiful women. And for me to write about women from inside his perspective feels a little creepy. I mean, it's light. There's not a lot of it, but I have to think about how would a man react to a woman. And then I can't, his brother shows up in the third book, and he's this fun Indiana Jones character that, I would love to meet in person, but he's Evan's brother. I cannot describe him
right
in the book the way I would personally describe him.
Right.
So that I think I found to be the trickiest thing.
Yeah, and I've had luck even just like watching some shows that are compelling, and if there's a character, regardless of who they are, who's really does something or is striking to me, I'm like, why is that? Why am I compelled by this? And then you kind of break down that writing of like, what made this person so compelling? And then if you transfer that to your own writing, you'll soon realize you're not kind of, you're avoiding cliches, I think, because you're just kind of writing from an emotional space. And I think, the best writers have a lot of empathy just naturally. I truly believe that. And I think, I think if you have a deep well of empathy, it's easier to write from a lot of different perspectives that you can at least hopefully relate to somewhat. And then your next one is coming out in November
15th.
Does it get old? Like the whole book launch? Is it still as exciting?
It's been funny because I have been so previously speaking, going back to that ego thing, I've in the past been so nervous about how my book was going to be received that I was actually dreading release day.
Yep.
And this is the first time I feel different. I'm used to good reviews. I'm used to bad reviews. I'm used to, what's almost worse, which is crickets. And right. It's like, oh, wow. Nobody even hates my book. But for the first time, I am super excited.
Yeah,
like
that's
it'll
awesome.
go out. It'll be what it'll be. But the point is, I had fun writing it. I had a lot of fun writing this book.
And there's and it's an exercise in letting go, which is which is critical in all aspects.
Hard for humans.
It is. It is. And what gets me nervous is like the waiting for the trade reviews. Like I hope Publishers Weekly just doesn't completely crap on this book. User reviews, I certainly want good ones, but and you want to be able to sell copies, but there's only so much you can do.
Right. And I agree with you on the trade reviews. My fantasy is still to have a starred review in a trade magazine, but I'm just happy if they don't.
Right. Use horrible words.
I wouldn't read this if I was on a desert island and it was the only thing I could read, Yeah, you don't want that.
No, you don't want that. Well, listen, I've taken up a lot of your time, but before I let you go, we're going to do a little storytelling.
Oh, golly.
I know this is the part that you've been waiting for. So actually, I've picked 3 books, and we're going to choose a random page and a random sentence to craft a little story. And 2 of these books, actually, I picked up in BoucherCon. So I've got William Kent Kruger's Fox Creek. So I was signing right next to him. And his 200 people, like one person in front of mine. So I just stand up. I'm like, dude, if you want me to take some of this from you, I'd be happy to help out. I can learn how to sign your name. So he was nice.
I signed right next to Chris Pavone. So
So it's he was a really nice guy. Then Allen Eskens' new book, Forsaken Country.
Wow.
And it's actually interesting. You can see the similarities.
Yeah, it's a trend.
The orange.
Although look where the author and the title where those are placed.
Yeah, true. Well, William Kent Kruger deserves most of the whole page for his name. Yeah. And then Colorado friend Emily Littlejohn, her I think this was her debut, A Season to Lie. So choose one of those 3 books.
Oh golly, let's do the Allen Eskens.
Okay, and then give me a page number between. I have not read this book. 1 and 350.
74.
Okay, that sounds like a good one.
Yeah, pick a good line. This is the part that makes all of your guests nervous, right?
Yep, and then give me at
least a good portion.
There's only a few lines on this page, so give me a sentence between 1 and 5.
2.
Okay, so this is just a piece of dialogue. one sentence, and I'm going to read this sentence, and then you just give me a couple sentences, whatever you think of that might come next, and then I'll do a couple sentences, and then after a couple minutes, I'll put us out of our mercy. Okay, you ready?
Ready.
Promise you'll find my family and bring them home.
Don't ask me what I'm going to do after they're back. Just get them here.
I was conflicted with the order. I knew I was getting well paid to do exactly what the man asked me to do, but I had also seen his little girl, those eyes. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She did not want to go back home.
What made it tougher was the other people searching for this family. Who would it be worse for if somebody else found them first?
What I didn't tell him was I knew exactly where they were because I had placed them in that room myself, and I was the only one with the key. It would take me about a half an hour to drive there and retrieve them, but would retrieving them just be a death sentence? What was more important, my life or theirs?
I pulled out my keys, gave him a smile, turned and walked toward the car. I had 20 minutes to make my decision.
I drove down the street, eased onto the freeway. Traffic was light. It didn't matter. I could barely think straight. I could feel my hands slicked with sweat on the steering wheel. I was headed in the right direction, but I didn't know if I was going to end up stopping there or not. I thought I was going to puke at any moment.
Then I realized I had my passport in the back seat. There were more options than I'd first known. Now what was I going to do?
How easy would it be? It would be the easiest thing in the world. The airport was another 30 minutes away. I had the cash my client had given me as a retainer. That was plenty enough to get me out of the country. I started to relax a little bit, thinking I could do this. And then I noticed the car in the rearview mirror.
Of course he'd follow me. That's the kind of man he was. Maybe he even suspected that I was all the way in love with his wife. I could deal with the man too, because next to the passport was my Beretta.
Oh, and we're going to end it there. That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah. I could very, very much visualize that.
That was cool. Thanks. That was fun.
It's a good little improv exercise.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's so nice to talk to you. I know I've been, we're friends, but we don't see each other very often. And it's nice to kind of dig into your past and to your life as a writer a little bit more than we have before. And it's, as always, it's wonderful to talk to you. And I'm always amazed to watch your ongoing success, and it's very well deserved.
Well, likewise, Carter. It's been fun, with all your Colorado Book Awards there. I was so happy this last time. You're doing great.
Well, thank you.
Really good to chat with you. That was a fun interview. Thank you.
You as well. We'll talk again soon. Take it easy, Barbara.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
So that's it. That's my conversation with Barbara Nickless. She's great. We'd gotten a chance to catch up a few weeks ago in Minneapolis at the VoucherCon conference, and that was fantastic. And it was great to be able to sit down with her and kind of dig into her life a little bit more and learn some things that I didn't know about her. So as always, it was wonderful to talk to her. I encourage you to find out more about her, and you can just do that by going to her website at barbanickless.com. Check out her books. She's phenomenal. And if you want to find out more about me, you can just go to carterwilson.com and see where I might be speaking next, or making some kind of appearance, or check out my blog or subscribe to my newsletter, all that good stuff. That's it. Thank you very much, as always, for watching and or listening. I do appreciate it. More episodes coming out very soon. In the meantime, take care.